on, everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here with our value picks for the 3M Open. It's a week with a relatively weak field. I mean, really a dumpster to say the best. So we're gonna have to do some dumpster diving to try and uncover some of those diamonds in the rough, priced $7,500 and below on Draftkings, to help you get some salary flexibility and, of course, some leverage for your lineups. So this video, we're gonna focus on those cheap players, and I expect to model well this week. One or two of them might be a little bit chalky, so maybe just play them in cash contest, however you want to deal with it. But these guys are particularly solid course fits and are also coming in with some pretty solid form as well. In general, they are the type of players that I'm looking to get to in most formats. Maybe not in large field GPPs if they end up coming in a little bit more popular than I expect, but if they're in that 10 to 15% range, they're going to be people I'm willing to fire on. So excited to hop on into it. Let's go ahead and get this thing popping. Alrighty, first up this week, we've got Wyndham Clark at an even $7,500. Now, he's been coming in with some really consistent form, which for Clark is really the first time we may have ever seen this. So if we take a look at the recent finishes, you'll see it's been a bunch of made cuts, and you'll see back towards a few months ago, he was looking like the Wyndham Clark of old, couple missed cuts in a row, top 10 finish. But over his last three starts, or I guess just over his last five, is really where I was focusing on this. 4 or 5 made cuts, one top 10, a top 20 finish, a few other just middling made cuts, which for Wyndham Clark is well better than his baseline. I mean, he's usually a top 20 machine when he makes cuts, but goes out there and misses like 4 out of 6, 5 out of 6 at times. Sometimes they'll go on a streak of 6 or 7 straight missed cuts, but really the shots gained metrics tell the whole story. He's gaining a ton of strokes off the tee, which you'd expect for Wyndham Clark, and we'd also expect him to be an incredible around the green and putter, just a short game wizard that also happens to be one of the longer players on tour. The one thing that is always his kryptonite is going to be that approach play, which is really hard to kind of get over, hard to reconcile, because shots gained approach is by far the most consistent stat from week to week, also arguably the most important stat. But at this golf course, pretty much everyone hits greens in regulation. They're not the biggest targets, but they are extremely receptive, and because you're dealing with air up there in Minnesota that's a little bit thinner than what they're used to seeing, especially at sea level, they're hitting a lot smaller clubs into greens, right? It's probably at least a club difference, sometimes a club and a half difference. So for guys like Wyndham Clark that have that elite distance off the tee, I mean, he'll be setting up wedges into plenty of holes around TPC Twin Cities. So I do like the stats there. Even over the last 50 measured rounds, it holds up, right? He's still not the best approach player, but gaining off the tee, gaining around the green and with the putter, just somebody who at his price tag is coming in with a lot of the form I'm looking for. And because he hasn't been flashing a ton of top end upside, it's not like he's going to be popular. A few first looks at ownership has him well below the 5 to 7% range, which is something I am very comfortable getting over the field on. Next up, we've got Austin Smotherman, who is a regular here on the channel. I talk up Austin Smotherman probably more than anybody else because his ball striking numbers are just from another planet. So if we look at the finishes, you'll see outside of last week, it really isn't all that flashy, but you can see a top 10 finish at the Barracuda, made cut at the Barbasol, 3 other made cuts there. The John Deere and the Travelers were the first missed cuts for quite some time, but more than anything, like I said, it's all about the ball striking numbers, where he's gaining close to half a stroke per round off the tee and close to a third, well, a little bit over actually, a third of a stroke per round with the approach play. For rookies, I mean, this is outstanding, and this isn't just a 50-round sample size. If you go over the entire season, he's a top 30 player both off the tee and on approach on all of the PGA Tour, let alone this field where he's top 5 in both categories. So Smotherman, he's been doing this for quite some time. It's just on bent grass, it happens to be his favorite surface by far. You can see he's actually a gainer on the bent grass surface, whereas on most other surfaces, he tends to be a little bit inconsistent. And on the Korn Ferry Tour, all of his top 5 finishes happen to be on bent grass. So kind of like a Svensson, who we talked about the day before, who also happens to love the bent grass surface. These ball strikers that have had a lot of their top finishes on bent are going to be key factors of my player pool. And also like Wyndham Clark, not going to be super highly owned. And you also see Wyndham Clark also loves himself some bent grass. So a little bit of a narrative that we're going on there, but also 2 healthy ball strikers that I see setting up plenty of opportunities. Mid-video plug of my Patreon page, where if you're looking for access for all of my projections, all of my plays, modeling, also the Discord server, prize picks, spreadsheets, all that sort of fun stuff that I have to offer, make sure to go ahead and check it out. A link is down in the description. It's $10 a month for that service, and really, you're not going to find a better value out there. I do coaching one-on-one in the Discord, but on top of that, a really educated, smart community of like-minded individuals that you can toss ideas off of, shoot the shit, break down slates together. Just overall, a great time, and we like to have some fun with DFS too. It's not really something, we obviously take it seriously, but we don't take ourselves too seriously down there. It tends to be a community where not anybody's going to big boy you, anything like that, and really just something that I think you guys would be proud to be a part of. So make sure to check it out if that rings your bell. But with that being said, right back to the action. Next up, we've got Gsluke Kim, who is, like I said last week, absolutely legit. This kid is a top 40 player in the world now. He was just given a special temporary exemption for the PGA Tour, which means he will be playing in almost every event throughout the rest of the year. So the rest of the 3 events before the FedEx Cup playoffs. And if he's able to qualify for the playoffs, he'll be able to play in them. So he's in that type of boat right now. He's playing for his tour card next year. And he's ranked higher on the official World Golf rankings than a lot of notable names. Like Taylor Gooch, for example, Keegan Bradley. You're looking at Gsluke Kim being an elite, higher pedigree player, at least as of right now, per the official World Golf rankings, than all of those players. And he's $7,300. I mean, Keegan Bradley, Taylor Gooch, would be like $10,500 in this field, and we're getting Gsluke at $7,300. Now, last week I said the same thing, was completely underpriced, was in that 6K range, and I thought he might be chalky. He was only 7% owned, so people are not coming around on Gsluke Kim, and now he made the cut. He was on the television broadcast for quite a bit over the Open, so a lot more of the casuals may have seen Gsluke Kim, aka Tom Kim, and might be coming around to it. But I only have him at right around like 13 to 14% ownership at the very most right now, which is something that I'm definitely willing to get over. I mean, he should be 25 to 30% owned because you could argue that he's at least $2,000 too cheap. He's playing in the morning wave, so that's another thing I want to mention is that for the guys that are coming over from Scotland, I really would prefer if they're playing in the morning. That's because if they're going to be jet lagged, it's at least 6, actually might even be 7 hours behind on their biological clock. I want them teeing off at 7 a.m., which is more equivalent to something like 2 to 3 p.m. per their biological clock. Whereas if they were starting on the PM wave for their first day, it's going to be like 8 to 9 p.m. when they're teeing off, and they're going to be dealing with some serious fatigue. And then they're going to have to go to sleep, wake up, and get back on the golf course. I mean, that just seems like a recipe for disaster. So for the guys that are coming over from the Open, like a Gsluke Kim, I definitely like the fact that he's playing in the morning wave, and even throughout the rest of the player pool, that's kind of how I'm handling that situation, right? For guys like Tony Finau that will be playing in the PM wave, I expect fatigue to be a huge factor there, but not for Gsluke, who's been absolutely fantastic, gaining across the board with the shots gain metrics. Just you cannot find a fault in this guy's game. And while it's just marginal gains with the putter, he's not gaining a ton of strokes with either ball striking category. He's been above average at everything. And what is he, like 19 years old or something like that? I mean, this kid just has a ceiling through the roof. Even over the last 50 measured rounds where you're starting to pull stats from him playing in random majors from the last few years, he's still around a neutral in every category. And that includes some really piss poor performances where he's missed some cuts. So you're talking about a kid who, at least per me, I look at him as like a top 25 player in the world. I think he has that type of upside. And over the next 2 to 3 weeks, we might come to find that out because he'll be playing every single week on that special temporary exemption. And if he continues to put up top 25 finishes or made cuts every single week, keep an eye out for this kid. He could be an absolute stud. Next up, we've got Tom Hoge, who's maybe not the best model play this week. He has not been playing his best golf, but got to shout out my boy LSU Nick, who's kind of put me on to Tom Hoge this week. But he was kind of asking me questions about the course fit and whatnot. And the more and more I've looked into Tom Hoge this week, the more and more I really, really like the play. Because first off, bent grass is his thing, particularly over the last few years. He's actually a gainer on bent grass, whereas on most other surfaces, he's a huge loser with the flat stick. So that's the first thing that Tom Hoge had going for him. But on top of that, he's also a great iron player, right? Over the last 24 measured rounds, you might not really know it, right? He's just a marginal gainer there, gaining 0.11 strokes per round. But remember towards the beginning of 2021, I'd say even 2022 here, 2021 season, right? 2022 actual year. I mean, he was getting over a stroke per per round with the approach play. I mean, there was no hotter player on tour. And the one thing we've seen of late, though it hasn't really translated into performances, is the iron play has been there and everything else hasn't, right? But just remember the form he was in before that, right? Top 10 at the PGA, top 20 at the Byron Nelson. I mean, this guy is capable of putting up fireworks. So now that we're getting him on a positional track, so, 3M Open, right? It's not a short golf course, but with all the water in play, it might as well play like a short golf course because you're going to have to prioritize that accuracy off the tee over the distance, particularly in holes where that water's coming into play. And for guys like Tom Hoge that are just iron specialists, maybe off the tee isn't his specialty. I mean, that plays directly into what he does well, right? Hit some irons off the tee, hit some solid wedges into greens like we were kind of talking about before. He's also one of the better wedge players that we have on the PGA Tour. If he can just get that flat stick working, which has completely abandoned him of late. You look at the last 24 rounds, he's a loser there. Over the last 50 measured rounds, you can see he's also a slight loser there. But the one thing that consistently is a part of his game is that approach play. And again, I know it's been rough of late. What is it, like 4 or 5? 6 straight missed cuts. So obviously, that's why he's priced here at $7,100. But if you were talking about the form that Tom Hoge had at the beginning of the season, he's a $10,000 golfer in this field. Like legitimately, he'd be priced up there with guys like Adam Hadwin. He'd be priced higher than Sahith Theegala, right, in this type of field. So you just got to understand that you're getting what you're paying for. Obviously, you're taking a shot on his form, but if he returns to even a semblance of what he looked like in the beginning of the year, you're looking at a low-owned jackpot of a play who, again, loves himself some bent grass greens. Next up, we've got Justin Lauer at $6,900. And Justin Lauer loves bent grass. You can see gains 1.11 shots gained putting per round on the surface, which is ridiculous. But on top of that, the guy's just been making cuts. I mean, Justin Lauer, I don't know why he's not talked about more, but on the PGA Tour, I believe he's made the most cuts of any of the rookies, has the highest made cut percentage, had a top 10 at the Barbasol, top 20 at the Barracuda, so obviously weak field events, but still getting it done there, made the cut at the John Deere. Travelers and Memorial weren't his best performances, but even looking back to the last 3 to 4 months on tour, Justin Lauer continues to go out there and just make cuts. So if you take a look at his shots gained metrics, whether it's over the last 50 or over the last 24 rounds, you can see he's right around a neutral with every category. Over the last 24, it's been a little bit better, where he's been a gainer on approach, but clearly a putting first player. I mean, if you look at the last 50, take a look at the last 24 rounds, over either sample size, you're looking at a guy who just absolutely lights it up with the flat stick. And if bent grass is going to be his favorite surface, I want to target these putting first type of players on their preferred surface, right? If Justin Lauer was a putting specialist and was on Bermuda grass, which is actually one of his worst surfaces, then I want to be steering wide clear of him. Like I wouldn't even consider taking somebody like a Justin Lauer. But at a golf course that plays into that skill set, somebody that's been going out there playing consistent golf, you've seen over the last 2 weeks what he does at weak field events, right? 16. Top 10 finish, right? Typically at a stronger field event, that's probably like a top 35 finish, maybe like a top 20 finish there instead of an 8th place. But with how weak the field is, right, you don't have to go out there and gain 18 strokes to the field to go out there and win this thing. I mean, gaining something like 13 or 14 might get the job done, like you saw with Cameron Champ last year. It was one of the performances with the lowest amount of shots gained for the leader of any tournament last year. So Cameron Champ shot 15 under par. So it's not the winning score that mattered. He just wasn't that much better than the average player. It was like 13.6 shots gained for the winner there. Justin Lauer, more than capable of doing that, particularly with the flat stick where he can go out there, gain 7 to 8 strokes to the field. I know he's not the best iron player, he's not the best off the tee player, but at a golf course like the 3M Open where plenty of fairways are going to be hit, like I said, the JAR percentage is one of the highest of all of the PGA Tour. That plays directly into his skill set. And lastly, the last pick we'll talk about here is going to be Doc Redman. So kind of similar to a Tom Hoge, isn't playing his best golf right now, right? Early in the year, Doc Redman had flashes at the Players Championship, a few other positional golf courses where he went out there and was able to crack the top 10. And because he's always cheap, you're going to need him when he does that. And you'll see over the last, 10 events here, it hasn't been all that favorable. His only made cut is at the Barbasol where he finished top 25. So I guess that's good to see over the last few weeks. But more importantly, I'm looking at the last 50 measured rounds. In the 2 most important categories this week, he's gaining. He's gaining on approach and he's gaining with the putter. More importantly, Doc Redman, one of the better iron players, at least we've seen over the last few years in terms of consistency. Pretty much every time you look at his approach stats here, he's going to be gaining like a quarter of a stroke per round. He hits the ball extremely straight, is a very reliable ball striker, particularly with his accuracy into greens. I'm not the longest player off the tee, so that's why you're not going to see him gain a ton of strokes in terms of the off the tee play. You can see he's just a marginal gainer in both ball striking categories over his last 24 rounds. But really, the only leak in his game of late, right, has been around the green, right? That's the reason why he's been missing cuts. That's why he's missed 5 of his last 6 cuts. At this golf course, it's not an issue, right? Everyone's going to be hitting greens. It's kind of like St. Andrews, where the GAR percentage is much higher than every other golf course. So it's really about just taking advantage of those scoring opportunities, which, like I said, he's usually a gainer both on approach and with the putter, which is kind of what you're looking for there. And off the tee, he's an accuracy over a power guy, right? The issue with him is not his accuracy. It's the fact that he only hits it like 300 yards, right? He's not going to gain a bunch of strokes off the tee doing so. But on a golf course with all the water in play, right, that's not so much an issue. That's why Sepp Straka went out there. He didn't absolutely bomb it on every single hole around PGA National. He just kind of toned it down, hit fairways the entire week, and let his putting and his approach play do the work. Doc Redman is that same type of player. And PGA National, a pretty darn good comp for this week. So Doc Redman, I like there at $6,800. He tends to shine at these positional tracks. And another comp course I'm using for this week was TPC Sawgrass, right? A course where Doc Redman had a top 10 finish this year. So a lot of things pointing to him playing well. In terms of course history, let's see. Does he even have any? I believe he does. He has 2 missed cuts, but he didn't play here last year. Just to give you an idea on the other course history, Tom Hoagie has a top 25 finish here. One other made cut and one other missed cut. And outside of that, right, Wyndham Clark, I meant to mention this earlier, top 5 finish in 2019. So, of course, really volatile history with some of these value picks, right? You're kind of getting what you're paying for in this field. But a few of them do have some of those top-end finishes that we're looking for. Boys, that's all I've got for the value picks. Before you hop on out of here, make sure you smash that like button, but also go ahead and comment down below what your favorite value on the board is. For me, it's got to be Austin Smotherman. Just love the kid's ball striking. I think he's fairly priced, so he'll also be relatively low owned. But go ahead and let me know what you're thinking down below. And as per usual, guys, going to have some prize picks content, our fades and sleepers, our weekly DFS live stream tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, make sure you go ahead and do so you don't miss any of that when it drops. But best of luck with all of your lineups for this week. It should be a fun one. I know it's not the best field, but hey, when not all the attention is on the sport, when people don't want to put in the required effort for their research, those are the type of weeks that we can take advantage of. So I'm really looking forward to it. Hopefully one of us can cash out big there. But until then, guys, I'll catch you all on the flip side.